Calvin Holt is the youngest general in the Alliance, a man of tremendous military achievement, and he was forced to be my alpha. After we registered our union, he threw away the flowers I offered him and took off his wedding ring. He ordered me in a cold voice, "Don't let anyone know you're my Omega. Stay away from me and don't do anything pointless." Later, after a major victory in the war, he stood frozen amidst the celebrating crowd. His eyes red, he roared frantically, "Where is my Omega? He hasn't come back." The pool of blood beneath me spread. I smiled weakly. "I don't think I can go back. If our marriage is dissolved because I died, General Holt will probably be very happy. I'd been shot. The blood was leaving my body fast. I braced myself against the wall, fighting to stay upright. I fumbled open my personal medkit and started stuffing the wound with gauze to stop the bleeding. Even as a military medic, I never thought I'd be using my own supplies on myself. The adrenaline numbed the pain. I managed to pack the wound in my side, only to see I'd also taken a bullet to the thigh. My hands were getting weaker. I hadn't even finished bandaging my leg. My eyelids felt too heavy to keep open. My body felt lighter and lighter. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself floating in mid-air. I saw my own bloody body on the ground. For a moment, I was stunned. I remember now. Today, our team's mission was a surprise attack. Surround the enemy camp and rescue the hostages. They had recently hijacked one of our military family transport planes and stolen the black box. Right? I wonder if the little girl I rescued managed to find Calvin, to give him the data drive from the black box. I should go see. I floated out of the room, heading for the rendezvous point. From a distance, I saw him, Calvin. He was in his dark navy combat uniform, standing at the very front of the formation. His military cap cast a shadow over half his face, revealing a hard jawline and a prominent Adam's apple. Even without his S-class alpha pheromones, he had an aura of pressure and intimidation that was hard to miss. "Where is the attending medic?" Calvin's voice was sharp. "Step forward." In the dead silence, one man stepped out from the ranks. It was Edward. He was also an Omega medic, my roommate. Calvin walked up to him. "Where did Lillian go? Why didn't he return with you?" They were standing too close. At that distance, you can smell the pheromones. I knew because the last time I was that close to him, I smelled it. Fresh and deep, like a pine forest after the rain. A scent that belonged only to Calvin. He must have caught a whiff of Calvin's pheromones. Edward's face turned red instantly. "I don't know," he answered. Then, in a much quieter voice, he added, "Lillian's never been one for rules. He probably got scared of getting hurt and ran off." "Is that so?" Calvin's tone was flat as he turned and walked back to the front of the line. I rushed forward to grab his sleeve. "No, that's not true. How could I ever be a deserter? We've been married for a year. How could you just believe someone else and think I'm that kind of person?" My hand closed on empty air. I couldn't touch Calvin, and I had no way to explain. There was no denying it. Even after a year of marriage, Calvin didn't know me at all. We were rarely alone together. Besides, from the very beginning, he never wanted to be my alpha. Alliance regulations state that high-ranking officers of a certain age are mandatorily paired with a highly compatible Omega. It's meant to ensure alphas remain calm and rational during wartime. And I had pheromones that were a 100% match with Calvin's. It was one of the few lucky breaks I'd ever had in my life. After my father died on the battlefield, the Alliance covered my mother's hospital bills. So no matter who the council told me to marry, I wouldn't have objected. But I never expected it to be Calvin Holt, the S-class alpha who had received a presidential medal on a live Alliance broadcast. A golden boy, a decorated war hero admired by countless people. The day we registered, I was nervous and excited, like I was going to claim a grand prize. I didn't expect to get a bucket of cold water dumped over my head. No wedding, no permanent marking. Just a cold, hard order. "Don't let anyone know you're my Omega. Stay away from me and don't do anything pointless." I stared at the bouquet in the trash can. "Yes, General," I mumbled. But just before this mission, I think I screwed up his order. The morning before, I was seen coming out of Calvin's private quarters. I could cover the marks on my body, but the thick scent of alpha pheromones clinging to me was a dead giveaway. The soldiers were all talking. Calvin was furious. After training, I huddled in the barracks bathroom, frantically typing on my phone. General Holt, this is Lillian. I am incredibly sorry about what happened last night and this morning. Calvin probably couldn't be bothered to reply. He didn't. I swallowed my pride and sent another message. Don't worry. If anyone asks, I'll say I was in your room discussing important strategic intelligence. I waited for half an hour, my anxiety mounting. I got a short message back. When headquarters recruited you, did they forget to test your IQ? His words were few and they stung. I thought for a moment, then typed back confidently. In that case, I'll just say the scent on me is from another alpha. I'll make sure it has nothing to do with you. My legs went numb from sitting, and the general never replied again. He must have been satisfied with my final suggestion, but I soon realized I was being completely ignored. Soldiers would salute Calvin and he'd nod back. But when he saw me, he wouldn't even give me a glance, let alone a nod. He walked straight past me as if he were deaf and blind. It seemed Calvin was still angry. Of course, he really didn't want anyone to know about our relationship. But last night the assembly whistle blew. The surprise attack was about to begin. I rode with the advance team in an armored vehicle to the target location. The door opened. Calvin stood there, tall and imposing. He high-fived and shook hands with each soldier as they jumped out. It was an unwritten tradition in the Alliance forces. A gesture for a smooth mission and a safe return. I was at the end of the line. I wiped my palms on the front of my combat vest and got my hand ready for a high five. But when it was my turn, Calvin's hand smoothly changed direction. He adjusted his cap, looking straight at my hand held up by my face and the smile frozen on my lips. General Holt is really hard to please. I forced an awkward but polite smile, clenched my hand into a fist, and gave myself a little pump-up gesture. If I had gotten that high five from Calvin, would I still have been injured? I floated in front of him, thinking an inappropriate thought. Lillian, come in. Please respond. Calvin was speaking into his comms, calling my name. After repeating it twice, he frowned and pressed his lips together. A faint sound came from the comms. Even the wind went silent, allowing Calvin to hear it more clearly. It was static. Lillian, respond if you copy. This time, Calvin's voice was a bit harsh. Just as harsh as when he'd called my name the night before. Actually, his tone had changed several times that night. In the middle of the night, when he saw me burst into his room, he was shocked. Then he realized I was in the middle of a disorienting heat. He tried to snap me out of it with a cold command. The battle-hardened general failed. He lowered his voice, calling my name fiercely. Then he ordered me not to move. I can't bear to think about the details. Any single frame replaying in my mind makes me want to leave this planet immediately. When I came to my senses, I sat up in the disheveled bed. The sky was just beginning to lighten. He wasn't there. The sound of running water came from the bathroom. I looked up and saw Calvin's back. He was shirtless, his muscles as defined as mountains and valleys. He was carefully, meticulously washing his fingers. I buried my face in the covers, my cheeks and the gland on the back of my neck burning hot again. After a few seconds, I got up, found my clothes, put them on, and walked to the bathroom door. I apologized, stumbling over my words. General, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't want you to. Lillian, I told you not to do pointless things. Calvin turned off the faucet, walked over and said coolly, I will not mark you, because the war will be over soon. When that happens, we'll dissolve the marriage. I knew I had no reason to be sad, but I couldn't help it. My throat suddenly felt tight, making it impossible to speak. Calvin had every right to be angry. This was entirely my fault. I hadn't expected my heat to return a day after it supposedly ended. I had violated my promise to stay far away from him. But from the looks of it now, it seems a similar situation is unlikely to happen again. Because it looks like we won't even need to go through the divorce proceedings. I just wonder if Calvin will have a grim look on his face the whole time he's accepting a Medal of Honor as the spouse of a fallen soldier. He'd probably refuse to attend, I thought again. Still no response from the comms. Calvin clenched his jaw. He issued an order. Full-scale search and protection of the hostages. If you find Lillian, bring him to me immediately. The team dispersed quickly and orderly. Calvin stood on the now empty patch of grass. Suddenly, he turned. He looked in my direction and said, "What are you doing here?" I gasped, my eyes wide as I stared at him. Could it be Calvin could see me? "General, can I ask you a question?" I whipped my head around to see Edward standing behind me. His gaze passed right through me, fixed on Calvin. "Go ahead," Calvin said coldly. "There are rumors going around that Lillian is your Omega. Is that true?" Edward's eyes flickered, as if he was desperate for an answer but also afraid to hear it. I stood between them, feeling like a war criminal awaiting judgment. "Who?" Calvin's eyes narrowed. "Who is spreading such pointless rumors in the Alliance army? Do they want to be put in solitary confinement?" Calvin was furious, his tone harsh. But Edward wasn't scared. In fact, he looked pleased. He smiled and said, "I knew it couldn't be true." Then he ran off into the jungle. A leaf, blown by the wind, passed right through my body. It didn't hurt because my body was empty, but I felt a sharp sense of shame. This is how it should be, I thought, looking down. Calvin has no reason to reveal the truth for me. Even if I'm mistaken for an Omega with loose morals, I brought that on myself, didn't I? But why did I burst into Calvin's room during my heat? I thought about it for a long time. Still no answer. Just like that drunken night before we deployed a month ago. I can't remember a thing. Just then, a soldier ran over. He saluted Calvin and reported, "Sir, all captured hostages have been rescued and are ready for transport." My heart skipped a beat. "Is the little girl safe?" I blurted out. Why hasn't she given the data drive to Calvin yet? Did she lose it on the way? No one could answer me. "Good," Calvin said in a low voice. "You can move them out." "No, not yet. It would be terrible if we left that little girl behind." I followed the soldier into the jungle. But halfway there I saw Edward. He was hiding behind a bush, as if he'd spotted something suspicious. "Come out." Edward suddenly stood up and shouted, "I can see you." A few seconds later, a little girl jumped out of the bushes and ran in the opposite direction. "It's her. The little girl I rescued. She's safe." A 6 or 7-year-old child was no match for a well-trained Alliance soldier. She didn't get 10 meters before Edward tackled her to the ground. The data drive in her hand fell out and landed on the ground. Edward's eyes lit up. He picked up the little girl and asked, "Where did you get this?" The little girl was terrified. She cried softly. "An Omega brother with a Red Cross armband. He told me to give it to General Holt, but I don't know what General Holt looks like. Are you a good person? Can you please go save the brother? He's hurt." "Boo-hoo." Edward quickly clamped a hand over her mouth, glanced around to make sure no one was there, and then whispered, "I know General Holt. I can give this to him for you, and I'll go rescue that brother. But you can't tell anyone what happened today, okay?" The little girl nodded, and Edward let go. He handed her over to the officer in charge of the hostages and walked back towards Calvin. I'm about to be saved, I thought. "General," Edward shouted, waving his arms excitedly. He ran up to Calvin, forgetting to even salute. "I found the data drive from the black box." Calvin's expression sharpened as he took it. He asked, a little urgently, "Where did you find it? Did Lillian bring it back?" "No," Edward paused, then said in a low voice, "I found it near the firefight just now. The fleeing enemy probably dropped it." "Edward." I ran in front of him, shouting in shock, "Why are you lying?" "Calvin." "Don't believe him." Calvin's face darkened. He looked at Edward and said, "Is that so? Looks like you got lucky." He put the data drive in his pocket and asked, "Any news on Lillian?" Edward was silent for a few seconds. Finally, he shook his head. "No." The night before, when I came back from Calvin's quarters, I ran into Edward. He stared at me with wide, astonished eyes, then glanced towards the end of the staircase. All the alphas lived downstairs, including Calvin. He and I didn't talk much to begin with, and now, as if trying to avoid any suspicion, he quickly looked away and walked off. When I got back to our room, he told me, in just half an hour, "The whole unit is talking about you." Edward was furious. "Some people are even saying you came out of the general's room. The general is an honorable man. You better confess to everyone immediately and not tarnish his reputation." So, is that why Edward hid the truth? He hates me, so he doesn't want me to be saved? But now none of that matters anymore, because it seems I've lost any chance of survival. "Is there anything else?" Calvin asked Edward. Edward looked up. "General, I found the data drive. If that counts as a meritorious act, can I ask you a question?" Calvin, go ahead. "In the future, what kind of Omega will you marry?" As Edward finished speaking, a commotion erupted in the distance. The rescued military families were reuniting with their loved ones. The mix of suppressed sobs and laughter was incredibly moving. Calvin looked in the direction of the sounds, his expression softening. "Someone I love very much, I guess. By all rights, I shouldn't be sad, because I've always known I wasn't the person Calvin loved. Because I'm naturally optimistic, I always thought that with enough time and companionship, one day Calvin would acknowledge and accept me. But now, hearing him say he wants to marry someone he loves, I suddenly realized I've become an obstacle to his happiness. He could have found an Omega he adored. They could have dated, he could have proposed, marked her for life. He could have made all the traditional steps full of meaning and ceremony. Instead of being mandatorily paired with me, his alpha, forced to accept this plain regret. It's time to give up, I told myself. If you want less, it's harder to get hurt. The noise soon died down. A squad leader ran over to report, "General, all personnel are assembled, awaiting your orders to return to base." Calvin nodded and picked up his comms. His patience seemed to have finally run out. "Lillian, I hope you're not doing this to get my attention. It's not too late to come back now. But if I have to find you, you're out of the Alliance military." The other end of the comms was still silent. Calvin said to the squad leader, "You take the team and the families back to base. The rest of you, follow me into the camp to find him." "General," Edward said excitedly, "if we don't follow the route our informant provided, we'll likely run into traps or bombs. It's too dangerous. Lillian is not worth us." "Edward," Calvin cut him off loudly, his voice resounding. "Say one more word, and you'll be in solitary confinement when we get back." Edward's eyes instantly turned red. He pressed his lips together and said nothing more. He just followed behind Calvin, heading into the camp. Just as we were about to enter the camp, we crossed paths with the team returning to base. As we passed, the little girl at the very end of the line suddenly turned around. She ran over and tugged on the corner of Calvin's uniform. "You're General Holt, right?" she asked, looking up at him, timid yet certain. Calvin crouched down to her eye level. "Yes." The little girl pushed a crumpled object from her palm into Calvin's hand. "This was stuck to the brother's clothes," she said. "The brother put his vest on me and wouldn't let me take it off. Then he got hurt, he bled so much." Her voice got quieter, her red eyes staring as she asked, "Did you find him? He's not dead, right?" Calvin glanced at the black vest she was wearing, a look of unprecedented confusion on his face. Then he unfolded the piece of cloth in his hand. It was the military ID patch from the chest of a ballistic vest. Printed on it were the numbers 96511. Calvin's fingertips suddenly trembled. In a voice barely audible, filled with disbelief, he breathed my name. "Lillian, where is he?" Calvin gripped the little girl's shoulders, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Where was he hurt?" The girl burst into tears, shaking her head and sobbing. "I don't know. He was covered in blood, lying on the ground. He couldn't get up." Her face streaked with tears. She looked up and yelled at Edward. "You liar. You said you would go save the brother. You didn't do it at all. Give me back the treasure the brother gave me." Calvin frowned. "What treasure?" "It was a small, hard board. The brother said it was a treasure with important things stored on it and told me to bring it to you." Calvin's head snapped up, his eyes blazing red with fury. He stared daggers at Edward and roared, "Everyone, stay with me. Into the camp now." They moved quickly, Calvin carrying the little girl and leading the way. After navigating around some makeshift traps, Calvin stopped. He was breathing heavily as he asked the little girl in his arms, "Do you remember the route you took to escape?" I followed the little girl's gaze and saw a maze-like area of residential buildings. The squat, earth-colored houses were packed together, dense and sprawling. Most of the walls were pockmarked with bullet holes and damage. Swept by the desolate wind, they looked like a field of tombs. "What do I do?" The little girl started crying again. "I don't remember." The residential area was littered with landmines and explosives. Entering rashly was a death sentence. This was probably why the enemy hadn't pursued me to finish the job. Calvin handed the little girl to a soldier, telling them to wait there. "I will find him," he said, turning back, his voice serious and determined. "Don't cry." I watched him charge into the winding alleys, my mind flashing back to his face as a teenager. "Don't cry." Back then, he had said the same thing to me. My first meeting with Calvin was not a pleasant one. That was the day I received a military flag. It was folded neatly in a square wooden box, a substitute for my father's ashes. My mother had fallen ill and was in the hospital. 10 years old and all alone, I sat on the edge of a flower bed in front of the hospital, clutching the wooden box. I needed to cry it all out quickly, then leave the box with a doctor so I could go back to my mom's bedside. But halfway through my tears, a boy stood in front of me and said stiffly, "Don't cry." He looked a few years older than me, dressed in an outfit that closely resembled a military uniform, his black leather shoes polished to a shine. The boy's expression was serious. "Your father is a hero," he said earnestly. "You should be proud of him." I nodded, but the tears kept falling. The boy's brow furrowed as if he'd run into a difficult problem. He hesitated, then awkwardly and clumsily raised his hand to wipe my tears away. "Calvin." Hearing his name called, he turned and ran toward a military vehicle parked by the hospital entrance. The officer who opened the door for him was the same one who had come to deliver the flag. It should have been a brief, ordinary encounter that Calvin surely forgot long ago. But it replayed in my memory countless times, until the boy's receding back merged with the figure now weaving through the winding alleys. He's leaving again, I thought. Except this time, I'm the one who's leaving. Calvin ran without stopping, searching room by room. As he neared the edge of the residential area, there was a sudden, massive boom. A landmine had been triggered. The dust quickly cleared, revealing Calvin's dirty, stunned face. He looked at the nearby house, its wall blown open by the blast. He struggled to his feet, then fell again. A trickle of blood ran down from his temple. Calvin didn't seem to notice. He scrambled up and ran inside, collapsing to his knees in front of my body. He had found me. I just didn't know if it was too late. If I were to turn all the images of Calvin stored in my mind into photographs, they could probably be sorted into 2 categories based on his expression. There's the cold, solemn, and serious Officer Calvin. And then there's Alpha Calvin, who, even after we were intimate, was always getting angry with me. But now, he wore an expression I had never seen before. His eyes were wide with bewilderment, his lips and fingertips trembling. It was a sign of fear. Could Calvin, who had faced death so many times, also feel fear? He raised his hand but didn't dare to touch me. My body was slumped against the wall, a large pool of blood spreading out from beneath it. There was no sign of life. The standard procedure would be for Calvin to check for breathing and feel for a carotid pulse to confirm my death. But he did neither. Instead, he used the bandages by my hand to wrap my leg wound and stop the bleeding. Then he swept me up into his arms and sprinted back the way he came. Soon he was out of the residential area. The waiting team had brought an armored vehicle, parking it at the camp entrance. The moment Calvin laid my body on the stretcher inside the vehicle, Edward rushed forward to check my wounds. "Get away." Calvin threw him aside like a cornered beast. "Don't you touch him." Edward fell to the floor, choking out, "He needs a hemostatic agent." The armored vehicle sped towards the base, the rough ride causing my body to jolt continuously. Calvin snatched the hemostatic agent from Edward's hands and gently cradled my head in his lap. Then he used the scissors from the medkit to cut open my clothes, revealing the wound I had crudely packed. After years in the military, Calvin was skilled at first aid. But as he tried to apply disinfectant spray and powder, his unsteady hands wasted much of it. The atmosphere in the vehicle was heavy and oppressive. Not a single soldier dared to speak. Only the little girl's trembling voice broke the silence. Is the brother going to die? Did he die because he saved me? No, Calvin said, his head bowed, his voice very soft. He's not going to die. I sat beside the sobbing little girl, wishing I could tell her my injury wasn't her fault. At the time, most of the enemy had been captured, and the hostages were already being evacuated. After quickly bandaging a soldier's leg wound, I found the little girl in a cluttered room. She was terrified and had forgotten her own name. I told her if she could just be a little braver, the nightmare would be over. I took off my ballistic vest and put it on her, asking if anyone else was hiding nearby. She thought for a moment and said a few bad guys had stayed behind to cut something with a loud machine, hadn't managed to escape, and were hiding in a nearby house. The black box was too cumbersome to carry. They must have cut it open with a power saw to take the data drive. I was going to escort the girl out and then report my findings, but we ran right into that group as they were fleeing in the opposite direction with the drive. That drive contained flight paths to and from various bases and their precise coordinates. Could not fall into enemy hands. Without a second thought, I opened fire. After I got the drive, a few of the enemies suddenly returned and attacked. I was outnumbered. My ammo ran out, and I had to retreat deeper into the residential area with the little girl. That's when I was shot in the side and thigh. We hid in a small house and weren't pursued further. I tried to contact Calvin, but there seemed to be a signal jammer in the camp. My comms were useless. A child is light and less likely to trigger the bombs. I gave the data drive to the little girl, told her to climb out the window, run out of the camp, and find General Holt. What does General Holt look like? The little girl asked, nervous and timid. I was starting to bleed out, but I hadn't felt the pain yet. I managed a small smile and said softly, he's the tallest, most handsome alpha, but he also looks the saddest. Why is he sad? Because of me, I think. I was getting cold. He's angry with me and he hasn't forgiven me yet. That's why he wouldn't look at me, wouldn't talk to me, and wouldn't high-five or shake my hand. The armored vehicle drove directly to the base hospital. Several medics were waiting at the entrance and rushed my body into the emergency room. Calvin, covered in blood, stood frozen outside the ER doors. A short while later, a small group of people flooded into the ward area adjacent to the rescue zone. They were some of the military families we had rescued. Many bandaged soldiers came out of their rooms, joyfully embracing their Omegas. For a moment, the hallway was filled with reunited lovers. They held each other tightly, laughing and crying. An Alpha was loudly thanking God, then kissing the Omega in his arms, saying, "Thank God you're okay, you're back." The joyous, warm atmosphere seemed to be separated by an invisible wall. Calvin watched them blankly. Then he suddenly doubled over and fell to his knees, letting out a pained, hoarse cry. "What about my Omega? Lillian, don't go. I'm begging you." A nearby soldier who heard him looked shocked. Edward's eyes went wide, and he staggered back a few steps until his back hit the wall. He shook his head, saying, "This is impossible." Calvin shot up, pinning Edward against the wall with his elbow. He snarled, "You better pray Lillian makes it out of this okay. Otherwise, I'll kill you." He watched Edward's face turn from pale to purple before abruptly letting go. Several soldiers rushed over, pulled the choking Edward up from the floor, and helped him away. I looked at the tense, coiled form of Calvin, my confusion growing. Is he worried about me? But why? Calvin had witnessed many sacrifices. He always handled the death of a soldier with calm professionalism, never showing too much grief. Besides, I was only his Omega in name. He didn't love me, right? Are you angry again? The little girl looked up at Calvin, asking innocently. Calvin seemed not to understand. "What?" he asked hoarsely. "The brother said you were angry at him, that you weren't happy." the little girl said. Do you treat him like this when you're angry, too? Calvin looked at her, his face turning pale. After a moment, he looked back at the emergency room doors, his eyes turning very red. No, Calvin said softly. I wasn't angry at him. I couldn't even figure myself out, that's why. He fell silent, his Adam's apple bobbing with suppressed emotion. When I see him again, I'll tell him that, actually. General. The ER door suddenly opened, and a medic ran out, cutting him off. Lillian might not make it. Can we notify his next of kin as soon as possible? Calvin stared blankly. How could he not make it? How could he? He murmured. The medic was puzzled by the general's strange reaction but continued. His heart has already stopped, but we will continue resuscitation for another 40 minutes. His heart has stopped? I'm leaving. I looked at Calvin and saw him staring blankly at the ER doors. Suddenly, I saw a faint blue glow begin to emanate from all over his body. Calvin's breathing quickened. His face flushed as if he were burning up. Commotion started down the hall. Beta doctors and nurses began guiding alphas and omegas downstairs. As a spirit, I couldn't smell it, but I could see the pheromone particles invisible to the naked eye. Calvin was having a severe rut. In less than a minute, the pale blue glow around him had turned into a deep blue flame, seemingly about to engulf him. He couldn't support himself any longer and fell to his knees, gritting his teeth. A beta doctor came to inject him with a suppressant, but Calvin, in his feral state, threw the person several meters away. He stood up and walked slowly toward the emergency room, finally stopping at the door. He pressed his forehead hard against the door, his voice a near desperate roar. Lillian, give me one more chance. Please. In that same instant, I thought I smelled a faint trace of pine. My soul felt lighter. The scent of a pine forest after the rain quickly grew intense and overwhelming. The next second, I was pulled into a dark vortex. Calvin finally passed out. He was held down like a wild animal, injected with a powerful suppressant, and strapped to a bed in an isolation room. Most of the time, he struggled restlessly. Then he would have short, fragmented dreams. He dreamed of being a child, taken to the military camp by his father, vowing in a child's innocent words to become a soldier. The scene shifted. Calvin was a teenager. He saw a little boy sitting by a hospital flower bed, crying silently. Pale, small, clutching a dark wooden box that symbolized sacrifice. It was his first time trying to comfort someone. Calvin was clumsy, his words of solace coming out stern and stiff. He was with his father, a colonel who had come to deliver the box, so he understood why the boy was crying. But alphas are naturally lacking in empathy. Calvin believed he understood the cruelty of war, which is why he pontificated about the boy feeling proud of his deceased relative. The irony was that not long after Calvin joined the army, his own mother died of illness at home. The war had just broken out, and the family's servants had all fled. Calvin and his father were on the front lines, unable to spare a thought for anything else. They only received news of his mother's death during a ceasefire a month later. He looked out the window at the rubble and ruins, feeling the true nature of war for the first time. It was a cruel, giant monster, disrupting the world's order, indiscriminately trampling on everyone's life. Why hadn't he taken better care of his mother? Overwhelmed with guilt, Calvin made a decision. After the war, he would retire from the military and mourn at his mother's grave for 10 years. His father, upon hearing this, didn't try to stop him right away, but soon he received a mandatory pairing notice from the Alliance Council. Calvin knew it was his father's attempt to tie him down with an Omega and a family. That's why he resisted Lillian, deliberately giving him the cold shoulder and even saying hurtful things. It's better than losing a father, than losing a husband, too, Calvin thought. Things started to go off track gradually. Calvin couldn't pinpoint when he started noticing Lillian. He only clearly remembered the night before deployment. At a party, Lillian got drunk. He ran to the long corridor behind the venue and blocked the alpha, who was leaving early. Perhaps it was the alcohol that gave him courage. The Omega's cheeks were flushed, and he slurred, "You toasted with everyone else, but you haven't toasted with me yet. Calvin stood silently in front of him, smelling the honeysuckle pheromones mixed with the faint scent of alcohol. The Alpha frowned. You can't have any more to drink, he said sternly. Oh, the Omega responded blankly, then slowly walked over. The corridor was dimly lit, with moonlight filtering through the tangled vines, illuminating Lillian's face. He stopped, standing very close to Calvin, brazenly violating the post-nuptial order given by the general. But the general didn't scold him or step back, because he saw Lillian's wet eyes. The tears didn't fall one by one but pooled in his eyes, ready to overflow. A blink. Calvin's reflection in his eyes would become clear, then quickly melt into a blurry shimmer of water. Lillian's eyelashes were long, blinking slowly, casting shadows on his clean face. When the music from the party paused, Lillian closed his eyes. He slowly leaned in, pressing his trembling, soft lips to Calvin's cheek. Calvin turned his head slightly, and Lillian's lips met his. Lillian held his arm, but without much force. Calvin didn't pull away, letting Lillian's clumsy, slow, and inexperienced movements stain him with the scent of honeysuckle. Likewise, Lillian was also infected with the rich scent of pine. Not long after that, Lillian, in the throes of a heat, burst into his room. The Omega had forgotten what happened when he was drunk, so he was confused as to why he had inexplicably come looking for Calvin. But Calvin knew, because the 100% matching pheromones were like a seed, planted in the Omega's body the night before deployment. Once there was a craving, his body's instincts would lead him to the Alpha's side. The dreaming Calvin was just about to explain when the scene before his eyes changed to the enemy camp in the forest. The soldiers were cheering for victory. Alphas were embracing their Omegas. Only he stood alone, frozen stiff in the crowd. His eyes red, he finally let out a frantic roar. Where is my Omega? He hasn't come back. In the haze, I seemed to hear a low, pained roar over and over. When I opened my eyes, my brain felt like a machine slowly rebooting. A white ceiling and a face from a distant memory. Lillian, he said in a deep voice, you're finally awake. I stared blankly at the insignia on his uniform collar. Took a moment for me to recognize him. He was the commander of the army, Warren Holt. The man who had given me the wooden box with the flag in it all those years ago. And Calvin's father. I wanted to greet him, but my lips just moved without making a sound. Commander Holt sat down in the chair by the bed. He began, you retrieved the data drive, a great merit. You can ask for one thing from the Alliance military. Go ahead, ask for anything. Even if you want that brat Calvin to take a month off to take care of you, it's fine. I blinked slowly, hearing a commotion from the next room. Just as the door to my room was pushed open, I gathered what little strength I had and said hoarsely, I want to end my marriage with General Holt. The person who burst in seemed to freeze. After a pause, he stumbled in and stood before me. I almost didn't recognize Calvin. His eyes were bloodshot, but his face was terrifyingly pale. He hadn't shaved in what looked like a long time, making him appear unkempt. The scent of his pheromones was almost gone. Commander Holt glanced at him with a frown. Why? He asked. Did this damn kid treat you badly? I'll deal with him for you. No, that's not it. I didn't want to cause trouble for Calvin. I made up a lie. It's me. I want to marry someone I love. Commander Holt's face fell, and he finally said no more. So I looked at Calvin. With difficulty, I managed a faint smile under the oxygen mask. As if to silently reassure him. It's okay, it's better if I'm the one to say it. This way, his father won't be angry with him. And when he meets someone he loves in the future, he can remarry without any baggage. It's okay. I told myself again. Commander Holt seemed to agree to my request. But strangely, Calvin didn't seem relieved or happy about it. He had a bed moved into my hospital room and took his suppressant shots on schedule every day. He took over my daily care completely, feeding me, giving me water, washing my face, and giving me sponge baths. He was so attentive that even the professional caregivers felt inadequate. When it was time to remove a drainage tube or change a dressing, Calvin would carefully release just the right amount of pheromones to soothe my pain. It must be his sense of duty to his legally bonded Omega. I reasoned, trying to explain Calvin's unusual behavior. Then I told myself, this is what any alpha would do. It's nothing special. I woke up late one night to see Calvin quietly watching me. His expression was complicated. He looked like he was silently counting my breaths, confirming I was really alive. The air was still for a half-minute before Calvin spoke first. Are you uncomfortable anywhere? I shook my head, then looked at the ceiling and said softly, General, you really don't have to do this. I requested the divorce voluntarily. It wasn't because of what you said that morning. Calvin sat up straight, his brow slightly furrowed as he looked at me seriously. It made me feel like I was protesting too much, so I struggled to sit up. It's true. We don't have to wait for the war to end. We can do it tomorrow. Don't move. Calvin came over and pressed my shoulder, making me lie back down. His hand was large, dry, and calloused from holding a gun. The touch and warmth seeped through my hospital gown, and I instantly felt a blush spread from my shoulder to my face. Calvin stared at my face for a moment, then suddenly asked, Do you have a fever? Without waiting for an answer, he placed his entire palm on my forehead. His hand was so big it covered half my face, and he didn't move it for a long time. I didn't dare move. Your hand is too warm, I said, a little uncomfortable. You can't tell. So please take it off, General. Is that so? Calvin's voice was deep, coming from right above my head, and it seemed to make my ears tingle. The large hand finally left, but a larger shadow fell over me. Calvin leaned down and kissed my temple. I froze in the bed, quickly dismissing the thought. How could he kiss me? He's just using his lips to check my temperature. But the test seemed to be taking an unusually long time. I blinked carefully. I don't have a fever. Thankfully, Calvin finally straightened up, allowing me to breathe normally again. You must be busy. You don't have to stay here and take care of me. I won't go back on my request for a divorce, so you don't need to keep fulfilling your duties as an alpha. Calvin looked down at me, listening patiently. Then his expression soured. Are you trying to get rid of me? I didn't dare look at him anymore. Feeling drowsy again, I just half closed my eyes, burrowed into the covers, and shook my head. We'll talk about everything after you've recovered and left the hospital, Calvin said, his voice lowering. Sleep. The scent of a pine forest after rain emanated from Calvin again, gently enveloping me. It robbed me of the ability to argue, and instead, I quickly and peacefully fell asleep. It was a month later when I was discharged. I returned to my old dorm room, surprised to find 2 alpha soldiers living there. Calvin caught up from behind, carrying my things. Military families have arrived, so the dorms were reassigned, he told me. So where's my new room? Probably because my leg hadn't fully healed. Calvin took my arm. As he led me upstairs, he said, From now on, you're living with me. I stopped on the staircase landing and looked at Calvin beside me. He was much taller than me, so his gaze was directed downward to meet mine. I gently pulled my arm free, climbed one more step to be at his eye level, and said, No. Calvin looked down at his empty palm. He seemed to pause for a moment before asking in a low voice, Why? The early autumn sunlight streamed in through the window on the landing. Half of Calvin's face was cast in the shadow created by his high-bridged nose, his expression unreadable. I used to be afraid when he asked questions like that, but now I seem to have found a bit more courage. We're going to dissolve our marriage soon, I said. Living together would be inconvenient. He'd already been forced to stay with me in the hospital for so long. If we had to live together now, it would be torture for him. Besides, I didn't want to be controlled by pheromones anymore. Calvin slowly lowered his hand, clenching it into a fist at his side. He looked away. But the barracks are full. There are no spare rooms. I looked at his profile. It's fine. It's still early. I can go into the city and find a hotel for the night. My leg. I can't do heavy training anymore, so while I was in the hospital, I applied for a job at the military hospital in the city center. I'll be starting soon. I looked at Calvin's astonished face, smiled faintly, and reached for the luggage in his hand. Could you Arrange for a car to take me into the city? Calvin didn't answer, nor did he let go of the bag. After a few seconds of stalemate, he asked, "Can't you stay in the Alliance military? If you don't like hospital work, I can." "I like it," I said, letting go of the bag to avoid his touch. I smiled. "I'll be working in the clinic while I go to grad school. That way, even if I'm not on the battlefield, I can still help a lot of people." Calvin stared at me, as if seeing me smile for the first time. "General Holt?" He jolted slightly, then picked up the luggage and headed downstairs. "I'll take you." Calvin took me to a hotel near the military hospital and paid for a week's stay. After putting the luggage in the room, Calvin stood on the rug by the entrance, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't. "General, it's getting late. Please drive safely on your way back." Calvin stood there quietly, the dim light from the entryway casting a glow on his shoulders. His tone was stiff. "Your leg. You haven't had your massage today." I felt the room getting a little warm. "I can do it myself," I said, a sense of urgency in my voice. "Please, you can go now." No one could order Calvin Holt around. He walked toward me. "You need to apply a hot compress first. And can you guarantee your technique and pressure are correct?" Calvin blocked part of the light, enveloping me in his shadow. "Yes." I turned my head away. "I'm a medic, remember?" The room was silent for a few seconds before I suddenly said, "You don't have to leave if you don't want to." I looked up and saw Calvin's eyes light up. I continued, "That way you can come with me to file for divorce first thing tomorrow." For some reason, whenever I mentioned filing for divorce, Calvin suddenly became incredibly busy. The night I checked into the hotel, he said he had an early meeting the next day. In the following days, he'd text to ask about my meals and daily life, but would always use being busy as an excuse to put off my request for a quick divorce. As a result, I had already been working at the military hospital for a week, and General Holt still had no time for a divorce. Just as I was considering whether to contact Commander Holt and have the council issue a decree, Calvin suddenly showed up at the hospital. At that moment, I was talking to an alpha doctor. I looked up and saw Calvin standing in the middle of the ward's hallway, his face cold and stern. His gaze was fixed on the alpha doctor beside me. I smiled, waved goodbye to the doctor, and walked over to Calvin. "Are you here for the divorce?" I asked. Calvin's expression instantly soured. He frowned at the floor and said, "I'm sick. I came to see a doctor." "But there are medics at the base," I said, tilting my head to look at his face. "Is it a serious illness?" His face did seem a little red. Calvin raised a hand to cover his mouth, coughed, and said, "A cold." I stood up straight, my hands in the pockets of my white coat. Driving 2 hours to a crowded military hospital for a cold seems like a bit of a waste of resources. "General, I want you to treat me." I froze, inevitably thinking of the past. When he was hurt, I was always the first to notice. I could hear his suppressed cough even from a distance and would give cold medicine to his aid. But now, "General, you should register with internal medicine," I said, looking at his frozen expression. "I'm a surgeon now. I can't treat you." With that, I walked straight towards my office. As I passed him, he gently grabbed my arm. "Lillian." Calvin seemed to use a great deal of effort to say my name. He said in a pained, low voice, "Actually, I just wanted to see you." Why did he want to see me? Probably a habit formed after the mandated pairing. But if I'm going to give up, I have to be decisive. So I said calmly, "General, please find the time to file for divorce as soon as possible. Let's not do pointless things anymore." Not long after that day, Calvin came to the hospital again, with a wound on his arm so deep you could see the bone. We stared at each other from opposite ends of the hallway. He said a few words to the doctors who rushed to his side, then looked at me again, seemingly oblivious to the blood pouring from his wound. I smelled the faint scent of pine, and the gland on the back of my neck began to burn faintly. The doctor called me on the internal line. "Dr. Lillian, General Holt has specifically requested you to clean and suture his wound." I looked at Calvin's dark silhouette and said into the phone, "Please apologize to the general for me. I have a surgery to attend to right now and don't have time." I hung up and walked straight to the elevator. The elevator doors closed, cutting off Calvin's burning gaze and the scent of pheromones seeping from his blood. After that incident, I applied to the hospital for a support mission in the southern war zone. The day my application was approved, I sent a text to Calvin. General, I will be heading to the southern war zone soon. Please meet me at the council office tomorrow morning to handle the divorce proceedings. 2 hours later, Calvin still hadn't replied. I called him. He picked up quickly. General Holt, hello? Do you have time tomorrow? Lillian, Calvin interrupted. Are you leaving because of me? I paused for a moment before answering, yes. The situation in the South is unstable. Calvin's voice was breathless. I'll agree to anything you want, just don't go to the South, okay? I stood in a quiet stairwell, feeling the voice on the other end of the phone getting closer. Lillian. I heard an echo. I looked up and saw Calvin standing at the turn of the lower staircase, looking up at me. Lillian. He called my name again, his tone filled with an unprecedented level of compromise and pleading. Don't go, okay? His chest heaved, whether from breathlessness or nervousness. The bandage on his right arm was seeping blood, a stark scarlet. I didn't answer, instead asking, can we go register tomorrow? Calvin's lips tightened. He struggled to speak. Actually, I know what you said to Edward. I cut him off. You denied our relationship. You believed him and thought I was a deserter. You even told him you wanted to marry an Omega you loved. So, General, let's stop doing pointless things. Now, I'm the one who doesn't believe you. Calvin stared at me, his lips opening and closing, but no words came out. As I turned to leave, he finally blurted out, okay, I'll be there on time tomorrow. Thank you. I let out a sigh of relief and heard Calvin say painfully, I'm sorry. The next day, I waited early at the council's office, but Calvin was nowhere to be seen. He didn't reply to my texts and didn't answer his phone. As closing time approached, I got a call from Calvin's aide. Dr. Lillian, the general was in a car accident on his way here. He's seriously injured and can't make the appointment. He must be lying to me again. Calvin has absolutely no credibility. Please tell the general that such childish tricks are long outdated. I was genuinely angry, so I said fiercely, tell him to get here and sign the papers now, right now. The other end was silent for a moment. Then came a choked sob. The general, he really can't come right now. While admiring the superb acting skills of Calvin's aide, I stormed back to the hospital. As I entered, I heard an emergency broadcast over the comms. Emergency announcement, all attending physicians from surgery, internal medicine, and the ICU, please report to the emergency department for a critical rescue. My heart skipped a beat. As I pulled on my white coat and ran towards the ER, I grabbed a colleague. What happened? A car accident, I think he said, running alongside me. An officer was driving into the city when he spotted some enemy combatants holding hostages. He saved the hostages, but got hit by a car. I heard he was barely breathing when they brought him in. My heart stopped for a second. I nearly got knocked over by someone passing by. Sorry. I said it quickly, but no one responded. Suddenly hit me. Calvin's I'm sorry was probably the last thing he ever said to me. And I didn't even respond. My heart felt like it was being twisted. I frowned, realizing I had already reached the ER entrance. Dr. Lillian, please, you have to save the general. I looked, stunned and bewildered, at the person in front of me, Calvin's aide. His face was streaked with tears as he cried. They told me to notify Commander Holt. They said the general isn't going to make it. Felt like being hit over the head. I mechanically pushed open the doors to the operating room. I was hit by a tidal wave of pine-scented pheromones. All I could see was red. Large pools of it on the floor. It was Calvin's blood. You can die from that much blood. My body felt like it was on fire, and my head started to spin. The beeping of monitors and rescue equipment faded into a dull background hum. Every step was a struggle, but I made it over to him and saw Calvin's pale, peaceful face. I think I called his name. Or maybe I didn't make a sound. How can you be dying? You haven't even divorced me yet. You're just pretending to be hurt because you don't want the divorce, right? Right? It must be. In that case, let's not get divorced. okay? Get up now. We won't get divorced, okay? Why are you still lying there? Calvin, you're infuriating. Why, won't you even give me the chance to hate you to get my revenge? It hurts so much. My heart feels like it's about to break. My gland hurts too, like it's being burned by fire. I slowly leaned closer to Calvin, letting the scent of honeysuckle melt into the pine. The monitor next to the bed showed 3 flat lines. Someone was removing the respirator from Calvin's face. He had been given up on. My alpha had been given up on by everyone else. But he's still my alpha. So I got very close to him. I leaned down and gently kissed his forehead, his eyes, the tip of his nose, and finally his soft but cool lips. Tears streamed down my face, mingling with our touching lips, making our kiss wet. Suddenly, I heard a beep, then another, and another, getting louder and more frequent, pulling the surrounding chaos and gasps of surprise back into focus. Stunned, I looked up and saw the rhythmic curve jumping back to life on the monitor. Then I was quickly pushed out of the rescue circle by my colleagues. When Calvin woke up, I happened to be by his side. He opened his eyes and stared intently at me. It was a struggle for him to speak. You saved me. I nodded, my vision instantly blurring. Don't cry, Calvin said hoarsely. I wiped my face haphazardly. These are happy tears, I said coldly. Now that you're awake, we can proceed with the divorce. Calvin closed his eyes, then opened them. He frowned. You're going back on your word? What? He managed a weak smile. In the operating room, I heard what you said, he whispered. You said, we wouldn't get a divorce. You went back on your word too. I retorted, refusing to back down. You said you'd be there on time to sign the papers. Calvin blinked, trying to look charming. I saved you once, you saved me once. I tricked you once, you tricked me once. So now we're even, okay? He reached out from under the covers and gently hooked my pinky finger with his. Hello, he said. I'm Calvin Holt, the Alpha the Alliance Council has mandatorily paired you with. I'm very happy that you are my Omega. I couldn't help but smile. Hello, I said. I'm Lillian, the Omega the Alliance Council has mandatorily paired you with. And I'm not happy at all. I'm going to hide the fact that you're my alpha until you've earned my forgiveness. Okay, Calvin said, as you command.